Welcome everyone to the New York Association on Independent Living's Community Outreach and Education Workshop. Before we get started, I just want to share a couple housekeeping tips. There is closed captioning available for this webinar, and there we go. At the top of your screen, you should be able to see closed caption. And if you select closed caption, if you select closed caption, you should be able to adjust the video settings on the caption size to next to the start and stop video. Then click on accessibility and move the slider to adjust the caption size. And with that, I am going to turn it over to our host today, Ron Kermani.
Thank you, Robin. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first of our three-part series in Advance the Independent Living Movement, Get Out the Disability Community Vote. And today's topic will be election accessibility and voter rights. My name is Ron Kermani, and it's my pleasure to be with you today. A little bit of background about myself. I'm a recovering newspaper reporter, having spent 12 years as the chief investigative reporter for the Albany Times Union here in Albany, New York. Following that, I've spent 30 years in various public relation roles as Director of Communications and Public Relations for the Public Employees Federation, PEF, the statewide white-collar labor union. Also for the New York State Trial Lawyers Association as their PR director. I was the executive editor at CSEA, the Civil Service Employees Association, for several years. And I also had the pleasure of working for three governors, Governors Pataki, Spitzer, and Patterson, as the Senior Vice President of Communications for the New York State Higher Education Services Corporation. And on target with our topic today, getting out the vote and election accessibility, I was also for many years an election inspector in Albany County. So it's my pleasure to be with you and to be your host and moderator today. Let's get right to the point. The Statewide Systems Advocacy Network, as you know it, SSAN, was created to support the independent living movement in the development of local partnerships and coalitions to engage in community education about issues affecting people with disabilities. The overall goal is to increase knowledge and visibility about the individual and societal importance of independent living, resulting in a positive change in communities throughout New York State. SSAN workshops over the last 7 years have trained on community engagement strategies, models for effective community outreach and education, principles for holding and participating in community-based meetings. The workshops have also dealt with handling the opposition, engaging the press, one of my favorite topics, and the development of timely Save Medicaid campaign, how to maintain the personal commitment to advocacy in the face of opposition and issue fatigue, and also campaigns for social change. This year's SSAN workshop takes community outreach and education back to where all grassroots advocacy must go to affect real change, and that's the ballot box. And with local, state, and federal elections looming large this year, it is up to the disability community to let candidates know the power of the community's vote and to elect politicians with inclusive civil and human rights agendas. We will start the day talking about what everyone needs to know with Helen Charlaine. She's the advocate with Disability Rights New York. Now, Helen joined DRNY in January 2016 as an advocate for the PAAT and PAVA programs. Prior to joining DRNY, she was an ICANN advocate at Southern Adirondack Independent Living Center. Since joining DRNY, Helen has helped organize more than 400 polling place accessibility surveys. She's also an active member of the Capital District Special Education Task Force. Helen, the forum is yours. Take it away.
Thank you so much for hosting this and for having me and for the kind introduction. So I work at DRNY for the PAAT stands for Protection Advocacy for Assistive Technology, and PAVA stands for Protection Advocacy for Voting Access. So I have an interesting job where the two programs they collide, especially when it comes to the accessibility of things like voting machines. And some of the information I shared today, many of you may already know, but with the election right around the corner, a refresher never hurt. And I'm not sure how you guys are doing questions, but I'm totally okay if people raise their hand or drop questions in the chat as I go.
We're going to have some questions later on after you're done with your presentation.
Okay, cool. Then we'll do that. Okay. Well, I'm trying to go to the next slide. I'm not quite sure how to do it. I don't know, Robin, if you're able to just have the slide and I can say next slide. I don't know if I clicked something that affected it. So you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So quick background on voter eligibility. In order to vote in New York State, you must be a New York citizen, at least 18 years old. However, to register to vote in New York, it was recently passed that 16 and 17-year-olds can register, and then they will be automatically put into the voter registration system when they turn 18. You must live at your current address for at least 30 days. You can only be registered at one address, and you must not be in prison for a felony conviction. However, you can vote while on probation, and you may be able to vote while on parole. So in 2018, Governor Cuomo issued almost 25,000 pardons to New York State parolees, reinstating their right to vote. Unfortunately, the link that I provided on this slide is no longer active. I checked it this morning and it does not work. So if you're helping someone register to vote and they're on parole and they're not sure if they are eligible to vote, I would recommend contacting their parole officer and possibly the County Board of Elections office, but definitely starting with the parole officer. And then another important thing that we really try to hit on is only a judge can make a decision that someone is not competent to vote. And I'm going to talk more about that in the next slide. So Robin, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So guardianship status alone does not determine voting eligibility. A judge must specifically determine that someone does not have the competency to vote. This isn't done just by simply having a 17A guardianship. It is a separate proceeding. Also, it states in the New York Mental Hygiene Law that receipt of mental disability services does not disqualify someone from registering to vote who is otherwise qualified. And it also, which I find interesting, states that the Board of Election Commissioners shall issue rules and regulations for community residences and homes, providing information about residences' rights to vote, how to register to vote, and things like that. So my office, we do a lot of outreach to self-advocacy groups, and many of the self-advocates live in community residences. And this is something that I plan on looking into more to see if this rule is upheld, and if anyone has any other information on that rule specifically, I would love to talk with you. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So brief voter rights, everyone, regardless of their disability has the right to a private and independent vote. And in a little bit, we're going to get to the tools that, that New York State uses to help make this possible. Everyone has the right to a physically accessible polling location, as well as use to an accessible voting machine, which in New York State are referred to as ballot marking devices. People may get assistance marking their ballot from any person they choose, except from their employer or union representative. If a person wants to bring their parent, spouse, child, friend, doesn't matter. Anyone they trust, except for an employer or union rep. People have the right to vote via absentee in certain circumstances. And in the world of COVID, anyone at the moment for the June primary election is able to vote via an absentee ballot. And I'm not going to get too much into that because Christy's presentation focuses a lot on that. And then also, everyone has the right to request a provisional ballot. And for those of you who may not know what that is, if you show up to the polls and you say, okay, I'm here to vote, and you go to sign the sign-in book, but your name isn't there, you can request a provisional ballot, which gives you the chance to mark a ballot. And what the County Board of Elections does is they then take that and wait until the day is over. They go back to their office and they verify and double check your voting eligibility status. So one thing that I really try to hammer into the people that I'm presenting to is, if you think that you're registered to vote, but for some reason you show up at the polls and they're saying, no, you can't, ask for a provisional ballot and everything will hopefully get sorted out correctly, but there's no need to ever leave a poll without casting your vote. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about different ways to find nonpartisan information about candidates. And I'm going to focus specifically on the website VoteSmart. It's what I use. I find it to be the most user-friendly and straightforward. And another thing, I always say this, people should not be getting their information on candidates from their Facebook feed. There's plenty of resources out there to find straight facts information, find out where candidates are getting their money from, where they stand on issues, and how they voted on certain things in the past. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to go into VoteSmart. And I'm specifically going to talk about the Vote Easy tool that they have, but since there's a screenshot of this main page, I'll give you the rundown. If you wanted to just simply look up someone who is running for office, the ones that are coming to mind, there's a Democratic race for DA in my county for David Soares and Matt Taparowski. If you wanted to learn more about them, you could type their name into the search bar at the top and then click on any of those little fold down folders, and it would give you a bio about the person, how they voted on issues in the past, their positions on hot button topics, education, abortion, anything, their ratings, their speeches. And the one I love is where they get their money from, because money talks. If there's a candidate who says, I believe in green and renewable energy, and we're going to push for an environmentally friendly future, but then ExxonMobil is one of their top funders, there's obviously some disparity there. So there's this tool called Vote Easy, and if you can please go to the next slide. You're able to choose which election you want to learn about the candidates for. So in this mock-up, we did presidential. So if you go to the next slide, once you click presidential, this is what your screen will look like. It shows the it shows the two candidates, and then a list across the top, like I said, hot button issues that people really care about. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see what happens if you click on education. It'll ask you, do you support requiring states to adopt federal education standards? What does that mean, you ask? If you click again, there's a little button, and if you click one more time, it gives you a little description about what it means to support or not support adopting federal education standards. And if you hit yes, then the candidate who most aligns with you would pop up at the bottom. And if you clicked no, the candidate who you most aligned with would pop up at the bottom. And you can go through every single one of those headers to find out exactly where the candidates lie on the issues that you care about. Next slide, please. So going back to the right that everyone has to a private and independent vote, ballot marking devices are the technology used in New York State to help achieve that, specifically for voters who have disabilities. It's a machine that is accessible to individuals who are blind, low vision, have dexterity issues, have other print disabilities where they may not be able to read, and it physically marks the ballot for them. And then it prints out the marked ballot, and then you take that marked ballot and put it into the scanner at the polling place. It's important to know that ballot marking devices technically only need to be used in federal elections because they are governed under HAVA, which is a federal law. At least in my area, they use ballot marking devices even at local elections and state elections, but that's something to keep in mind, and an area where more advocacy definitely needs to be done. It gives you the right to cast a private and independent vote, and anyone can use the ballot marking device regardless of disability. So anyone can go in and ask to use it, and I encourage those who want to learn more about the machine to do that next time they're voting at a polling place. It gives you insight as to how the machine works. It shows poll workers and election officials that people need this machine and people use this machine. And if you go up to use the ballot marking device and it's not working, it gives the poll workers an opportunity to hopefully get the machine fixed before the next person comes around to use it. I wish I could say that poll workers don't give voters a hard time when they ask to use this machine. It totally depends on your polling place. There are some voters who vote every single election. They vote using the BMD every election. Their poll workers recognize them when they walk in. And then there's other times where poll workers just are not trained at all on these devices. We've had situations where one of our colleagues went and asked to use the device. This was just a couple of years ago, and this is the poll workers' words. They said, well, you don't look like you have a handicap. And that's not a, what's the word? That's an individualized story. You hear things like that all the time. I've gone to polling places where there are just pieces of paper blocking anyone from using the machine, even though the machine isn't broken, or signs on it that says disabled machine only. So having as many people as possible go out and use these machines and bring awareness to it, I think is an important thing to consider. And if you go to the next slide, please, you'll see the two manufacturers of ballot marking devices in New York State. The AutoMark is used in the larger counties, and although both of these machines are over 10 years old and the technology is obsolete. The AutoMark device, from what I hear, works better. That's the device used in my county, and I don't usually have an issue with it. It's pretty straightforward. And then all other counties in the state use Dominion. Now, the Dominion ImageCast Evolution was recently certified by the State Board of Elections. So those devices aren't as widespread, but I know based on poll site surveying that we did in Rensselaer County last year, that there are select polling places that are starting to adopt the newest version of the Dominion machines. Next slide, please. And we talked about some of these a little bit. These are alternative accessible voting options if someone chooses to they don't want to use the ballot marking device for whatever reason. These solutions are not necessarily private and independent, but it is up to the voter how they choose to vote ultimately. So assistance from a trusted person, so long as it's not your employer or union rep. Voters can ask for assistance from a poll worker, and the way they do it to remain nonpartisan and make sure there's checks and balances is there will be one Republican poll worker and one Democrat poll worker who help the voter together. So there's accountability there and there's witnesses. And then also absentee ballot. So in a world pre-COVID, if you are an individual with a disability, the primary caregiver of a person with a disability, you're able to vote via absentee ballot. Again, I'm not going to get too much into it because Christy just did some amazing work to help make the absentee ballot program more accessible, where previously it was not at all. It was all done on paper and pen. So if someone had any sort of visual disability, print disability, dexterity issues, they would not be able to independently mark an absentee ballot. And then if you go to the next slide, these are just some ways, if you're looking for ideas of how to get involved and how to be a strong voting rights advocate and advocating for voters with disabilities, become a poll worker or encourage self-advocates and clients to become poll workers. It's a great way to make money. Again, in a world of COVID, it's more difficult. The risk is obviously higher going to sit all day and coming into contact with who knows how many people, but it's something to consider once everything settles down. Learning how to use the ballot marking device and encouraging others to use it. That is such an easy way to advocate for accessibility at the polling places. And you can take it a step further by organizing ballot marking device demonstrations with your clients, with your constituents, if there's any self-advocacy groups that are run through your independent living center. I worked last year, the year before, I worked with SANES, where we organized, SANES is the Self-Advocacy Association of New York State. We organized ballot marking device demos and mock elections at every one of their regional conferences. And it gave the self-advocates the opportunity to actually test out this machine, what it would be like on election day. It gives you a feeling of mastery, being able to test out this machine first. So you don't just walk into a poll not knowing what to do, worried about how it'll work. You already have the practice. And if any of you guys want to host a ballot marking device demonstration, you're not sure how to go about it, I'm happy to have phone calls, email exchange, some tips that I've found over the years organizing these. It depends on your county, how receptive they are. Some counties love getting out in the community and helping out, and then others, for some reason, just have their foot really firm and they hold on tight to their machines and they don't want, for whatever reason, the public to practice or use these machines. So I'm happy to help in any way kind of people are interested in that. Hosting voter registration drives, again, a very easy thing to do. Choose a day, choose a place, get some voter registration forms and advertise on your Independent Living Center's website or social media pages. Again, if you're interested in doing that, I have another completely separate presentation about tips and tricks for that. Celebrating and recognizing civic holidays. So National Disability Voter Registration Week is always the third week in July. National Voter Registration Day is September 22nd. And the first ever National Vote Early Day, which encourages people to vote early, which we can now do in New York State. It's encouraging people to vote early and avoid lines and other issues that may come with voting on election day. And then the last and biggest tip I have is building relationships with your local self-advocacy groups. Some of you may already have a tight relationship with them. Some of you may not know what your local group is. They are the best. They're always looking to learn. I go back, I feel like every year to the same groups, and every year I'm asked different questions from them, always wanting to consume information. And we also use, we've worked with self-advocates and self-advocacy groups in the past to survey polling places for accessibility. So they fill out, they go to polling places on election day and will fill out a survey based on if the doors are wide enough, if the doors are too heavy, if the parking is appropriate. And it really is just a great, it's a great groups to get involved with. And that is all I have for you guys. Thank you.
Great, Helen. Thank you very much. We'll open it up now for questions. And I believe at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little Q&A button there. And if you want to open that up, you can type in your questions and we will get them. And we'll be glad to read them and have Helen address them. So please go ahead and type in your questions. Helen, a question I have while we're waiting for a couple. How does New York State stack up to other states in terms of voter accessibility for your constituents?
Okay, sorry, I thought I had myself muted. Personally, I don't think great. Polling places by law are required to be accessible, but every county that we go out to survey for accessibility, we always find barriers in every single county, whether they be big or small. There's some places we go where there's still literal steps to get into the polls, and we try to find creative solutions to have them addressed. We do a lot of reports and a lot of letter writing. And in terms of accessibility of registering to vote, you're able to do it online. They recently opened it up to 16 and 17-year-olds, and it says in the law that school boards of education have to put in programs to advertise voter registration for high school students. So we're moving in the right direction, but we still don't have same-day voter registration. We have really, the deadline, if you want to vote in a primary for one party and you need to change your party registration, it's like 6 months before. So there's little things, well, they're not little things. There's things like that that definitely need to be addressed.
Good. We have a question, and I'm going to read this from Therese. A question: what are your thoughts on alternative ways to do voter registration events in the age of COVID-19?
Yeah, so Christy and our team, we actually had a meeting on this yesterday because National Disability Voter Registration Week is just less than a month away at this point. And it's tricky. It's going to be a little, frankly, a little more stale this year. We can't go out into the community and host and host these events. So what we're looking at doing is doing a lot of like educational presentations. We're looking to partner with groups like Black Voters Matter and other constituency groups to put on educational presentations and make sure to put plugs in there of, hey, don't forget to register. Here's how you can do it online. This is the website you can go to. If you can't do it online, this is the other way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely tricky and something that we have not,
Sure.
I don't think we came up with the magic solution for, unfortunately.
It's a work in progress, as most everything else is today.
Yes,
another question that I
exactly.
had is the ballot marking devices, are they available for every election, both local, state, and federal, or just federal elections?
So they're only required to be used in federal elections, but every election I have gone to has had them, and they're able to be used in state and local elections. I'd say the only ones that you may not see them at is school board elections,
Okay.
but I've even seen them at school board elections. Like I said, that's a big area of advocacy that needs to, you need to hone in on having that device at every single election, but legally it only needs to be at the federal elections.
Other
Right.
questions from our audience members,
I'll step
please?
in. Oh, can I
Christy,
step in
please.
just a second to clarify as well? One key thing to take away, though, in light of that question, is that the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is a federal law, that applies to every election equally. So HAVA, the Help America Vote Act, requires that these specific type of machines are made available for federal elections, which are known as the ballot marking device machines. Those are overseen by the county boards of elections, certified by the state. But if somebody in a voting precinct needs an accommodation, it doesn't matter what kind of election it is. If it's an election that a person is, if it's a public election where you have an eligible voter and they need a accommodation, whether it be a ballot marking device or a location that is physically accessible to them, under the ADA, that voter has a right to get the accommodation that they need so that they can vote privately and independently. Aside from whatever, regardless of what type of election it is, federal, state, local, school board.
Is it the role of the local election inspectors, of which I have been for which I was for many years, to make sure that those standards are met, or do they have to go to a judge at some point? We've had people go to judges on election day to try to gain access to the polls. It can be really jurisdictional from one neighborhood to another. So what advice do you have, Helen and Christy, if yes, they're there at the poll, but physically they're unable to cast a ballot?
Yeah, so this is a legal question, and the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, requires that polling locations be accessible. And if somebody's polling location is not accessible to them, meaning a voter's polling location isn't accessible to them, the county board, when we're speaking about the county the elections that the county board of elections oversees, that county board of elections has a responsibility to accommodate a voter who can't get into their inaccessible polling location. So it is allowed to some extent for a county board of elections to make to make sure that there are select polling locations that are accessible, and then assign a person who needs that accommodation to that specific polling location. However, that is absolutely not our position in our office. Our position is that every polling location needs to be accessible, and to the extent that it is possible. So we advocate that every polling location that that a county board of elections selects must be as accessible as possible, and they must take all measures, temporary or permanent measures, that can be made that are not fundamental alteration or an undue burden. They must take those measures and just to make sure that all the polling locations are as accessible as possible.
Good advice. Other questions from our participants out there in the field? Please feel free to type it in. Let's see if we have anything else up here. No, the box is clear. Robin, any other thoughts before we go on to the next segment or take a break? What would you like to do?
I think we're ready to take a break. I just put a note in the chat box that we do have a poster available that we've prepared for people to download in PDF format that they can display at their centers to help get out the vote. And we also have a handout available. Both of those are available at ilny.us/GOTV. So those are resources available for anyone who wants to start a campaign at their center.
Very good. That's great. Let's take a 5-minute break, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back here at about 1:45. Thank you very much. Shall we get started?
Works for me.
Good. Okay, very good. Welcome back, everybody. And we end today's discussion by talking about absentee voting in New York State today and recent litigation. And talking about that is Christy Asbee. She's Director of Disability Rights, New York. Now, Christy joined DRNY in 2014, and she is the PAAT, PATBI, and PAVA Programs Director. She serves New York State residents with disabilities receiving, interested in receiving, or having difficulty obtaining assistive technology. And through PAVA, Christy advocates for voters with disabilities to ensure voting programs across New York State are accessible to all. She is a leading expert in advocacy for voting rights for people with disabilities and has led DRNY to publish numerous reports about poll site inaccessibility across New York State. We're pleased to have Christy with us. And once again, Christy, the floor is yours. Christy, Brian, you have to click on your microphone button also.
Christy, just so you know, you're muted.
Okay, Christy's we're having a little bit of a problem getting her live on this with the audio. Stand by, everybody.
So Christy isn't able to unmute herself, so she's wondering if Robin, who's the host, oh, she got it.
Okay, good. Thank you, Robin. For whatever reason, my control buttons disappeared at a really inopportune time. Sorry about that technical difficulty. Hi, everyone. I'm Christy. I am an attorney at Disability Rights New York, and I oversee 3 programs in my office. Most notable today is the Voting Access program. Helen is part of the team, and we are doing a lot of work around absentee voting this year for obvious reasons. There are some real issues right now around voting. Voting is right now incredibly important. It's a very popular topic. So we're very happy about that at DRNY, especially in the PAVA team, because voting is incredibly important for people who are most marginalized, which tend to be people with disabilities, people of color, people in minority communities. And some people, quite frankly, think that their vote doesn't matter. And I understand where people are coming from when they say that. However, it's totally false. Everybody's vote matters, and everybody needs to understand that their vote matters greatly now more than ever. We have seen problems voting of historic proportion, probably not the worst problems we've ever faced in our voting program, but definitely in today's social media age, things do not go unseen, which for voting problems, that's a really good thing. For in other areas, might not be such a good thing, but this, the exposure to problems in voting and so in our social justice systems, these are very politically charged conversations, and they're difficult conversations, and they need to be discussed. So I'm so happy that everybody is on the line today, because it means that everybody is listening, and they're caring about this topic. In New York State, we have for as long as I can understand, as long as the existence of the absentee ballot, program, we have had an inaccessible absentee ballot program. So historically, voters will only have the option of marking an absentee ballot by pen. We are a state where you have to have an excuse to get a ballot. So even getting a ballot in and of itself is a challenge because it's not open to everybody to be able to get an absentee ballot. You have to attest to one of the reasons why, which is a temporary or permanent disability, or you're going to be out of the country, or you are in a VA hospital, or you are overseas or serving in the military and you're not going to be in the county. Right now in COVID, the governor is encouraging that everybody vote by absentee. But for people who have disabilities that are known as print disabilities, so they can't, so people who can't handle a paper and pen ballot, they can't mark up a paper ballot with a pen, these individuals are left out of the absentee voting program, or they will be relying on people to vote for them by absentee ballot. So someone with a print disability may rely on a caregiver or a family member. People who live alone may have to knock on a neighbor's door to ask them for help marking their ballot. That means that they don't receive a private and independent voting opportunity, which means that their voting opportunity is not equal. So one thing about the absentee ballot program, as well as the in-person voting program, is that there is no Braille or large print option to receive your ballot. And prior to the June election, this voting program was just, as I said, inaccessible to people with print disabilities, people who are blind, low vision, have dyslexia or dysgraphia, or have physical disabilities that limit their ability to handle paper and pen. So we can go on to the next slide. In light of COVID, and in light of all of the advocacy that organizations have done to try to make absentee ballots accessible, the American Council for the Blind had been advocating for years and trying to get legislation passed so that absentee ballots were made accessible. National Federation for the Blind, another member organization, they had tried tirelessly as well to communicate with the Board of Elections to make the absentee ballot system accessible. Those attempts were ignored largely. They did not put the pressure on the legislatures or at a regulation level with the BOE that was necessary to really to get noticed. So now we are in a time where our governor is encouraging everybody to stay indoors and to not be out and about in the community so that we can limit our exposure to the COVID virus and to limit the spread in general. So we have, New York has a voting program for June now that is largely going to be based on absentee voting by absentee ballot. This was the absolute perfect time to bring a lawsuit against the Board of Elections to finally make change to the absentee voting program. This change needed to happen years ago when other advocates started this conversation and pursued this conversation tirelessly, but litigation wasn't always an answer then, and it was the only answer now to make quick change. So DRNY held a series of roundtables to listen to voters back in April, and we listened to voters. We heard what voters were saying. We heard that voters wanted to have an equal right to vote how they wanted to vote. So whether that be absentee or in person, both voting programs, absentee voting program as well as the in-person voting program, they needed to be equally accessible to everyone. Forcing voters who wanted to vote privately and independently to go in to vote at their polling location or at the Board of Elections, that was not a solution that was going to work. That was a solution that Governor Cuomo thought would work through an executive order that he put in place that said boards of elections must generally by appointment make sure that they have the accessible ballot marking devices available for voters who have disabilities. But that again was just an in-person option. It wasn't making the absentee ballot accessible. So there was also, prior to filing the lawsuit, during the time when DRNY was hosting these roundtables, learning about what people wanted, there was a complaint that the American Council for the Blind, both the national organization and the state organization, along with several people, individuals who were complaining about the system, they filed a complaint to the U.S. Department of Justice. DRNY was watching that very closely. It was not moving fast enough. So the option was, and meanwhile, there was a successful lawsuit that was that had just been filed and had an immediate resolution on in Michigan. And there were two other cases previously that were not COVID related. They predated COVID, one in Maryland and one in Ohio, and courts had said that that absentee ballots can be made accessible, and that the measures that a state must take to make them accessible were not did not cause an undue burden or did not alter the voting program so significantly that they weren't able to do them. So let's go to the next slide. We decided, given the efforts to date and the positive outcomes in several cases, both predating COVID as well as in light of COVID, to file a lawsuit. And we were, Disability Rights New York, along with disability rights advocates and Brown Goldstein Levy, put together a real force to be reckoned with. We have great organizational plaintiffs in this case that are very strong voices. We have the National Federation for the Blind as well as the American Council for the Blind as organizational plaintiffs in this lawsuit, as well as members who are named in the lawsuit, and the Center for Independence of the Disabled of New York, also known as Sydney. That is the ILC down in Manhattan. This coalition of disability rights groups, along with named plaintiffs, including two named plaintiffs that have physical disabilities that do not have disabilities based on their vision. This group, we put this team together really fast, and we requested emergency and court intervention. We filed the case on a Friday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And within 1 hour, the judge had responded saying, we need to have a hearing on this case immediately. I need to know what's going on. We hadn't even told the Board of Elections yet that we had sued them. The judge recognized the importance of voting and voting privately and independently, which was really, really impactful. The Board of Elections immediately responded, and the plaintiff group along with the Board of Elections, got together and we did come to a solution for the June 23rd primary, the primary that is happening next week. It is absolutely not a perfect solution. There are many problems that we knew we knew the problem of some problems that existed. One, the fact that it is not a fully accessible option for the June election, and another, other issues that have just come to our attention since we have come to this emergency agreement. So the basics of this case is that we had this we requested the emergency relief. The judge immediately responded to that. We came to a quick resolution that did not put an undue burden on any boards of elections. We have a second phase of this case to make the future elections fully accessible. Our goal as plaintiffs is to make an accessible ballot program that is fully accessible to people. We call this phase 2. We knew that phase 1, this emergency relief phase, was not going to be fully accessible. It wasn't fully accessible to several, if not all, of our plaintiffs, especially the named plaintiffs. It's not accessible to Jose Hernandez as well as Keith Gerge, 2 of the named plaintiffs with physical disabilities. Because what is the solution for this phase 1 emergency relief for June is only an electronically delivered ballot. It's not an electronically submittable ballot. So when somebody receives a ballot, they can mark it on their computer privately and independently. They still have to print the ballot at their home printer or at a printer that they can access. And they have to put the paper ballot in the envelope. They then have to sign the oath envelope and then put it in another envelope and then submit it in the mail. And for people who have physical disabilities or people who are blind that can't distinguish what the papers are, that's an impossible task to do privately and independently. So this case is continuing. Yesterday, we received an answer from our complaint from the Board of Elections. I have not come through this answer yet. We were pleasantly surprised to see that they just filed an answer and they did not file a motion to dismiss, which is just a formal way of saying that the state did not ask the judge to dispose of this case because there's no legal issue. So it's wonderful progress to see that the state is not denying that there is a legal issue to resolve. We don't know. Why don't we go on to the next slide? Okay, so we don't know what November will look like, but we know what June looks like because that was the first phase. That was the emergency relief phase. Right now for June, I hope many of you received the information that we sent last week that explained the deadline to apply for an accessible absentee ballot was yesterday. The timing of this presentation for purposes of the BOE, the Board of Elections set deadlines, was slightly unfortunate. There's nothing we could do about that. Because I believe that this training was set up even before we came out with the stipulation. So we did what we could to get the word out there in some information that hopefully you all received. But what this stipulation looks like, the details thereof, is this stipulation, again, only applies for the June election. The June election's on June 23rd. You must submit an accessible absentee ballot request form from your, it's a form that's available on the State Board of Elections website, which the link was in some materials that hopefully you all had received prior to this training. And that form was to be submitted to your county board of elections by yesterday. If you had problems submitting this form, contact Disability Rights New York by phone or contact Helen or myself by email today, and we can try to navigate this issue with you. We have pled to the State Board of Elections to extend the deadline. They have ignored our request. So my guess is that maybe they won't hold firm to this June 16th requirement, and anybody who has not submitted their form should just submit it anyway and see what happens. Follow up with a phone call to the County Board of Elections. Yes, Helen just put our email addresses in the chat box. So if you need help navigating the deadline issue with your accessible absentee ballot request form, you can email Helen or myself or both of us, and we will get back to you as soon as possible today. All right, so that's the request form. Okay, it's a different request form than the absentee ballot request form that you may have returned to your County Board of Elections back in May, before our stipulation even existed. If you applied for a paper absentee ballot and then you applied for an accessible absentee ballot, you will receive an accessible absentee ballot and you will not receive a paper absentee ballot. Okay, the next point, county boards of elections will mail your voter oath envelope as well as the mail the USPS envelope to all voters who request the accessible absentee ballot, so it's equal to other people who are requesting the paper ballot. I actually have the envelopes. Sorry, I'm reaching over because I realized I didn't put them in front of me. In my county, I live in Columbia County. This is the oath. This is what our oath envelope looks like. This is what a voter would receive if they requested the accessible absentee ballot. There is a signature line right here. Now, every county's oath envelope will look different. But this is what mine looks like. When you receive the when you're voting on the accessible absentee ballot, you are allowed to sign anywhere on the envelope, anywhere. They will accept your signature. This is the outer envelope, the USPS envelope. So what you would do is when you would receive, and this takes me to the third point. The county boards of elections will email so at the back end in the county board of elections office, they are working with vendors when they receive a request for an accessible absentee ballot. They're working with vendors to get the ballot into a PDF, a readable, markable PDF. So then the voter will receive an email with presumably a link, although counties may do it different. But you should receive a link, and then that link will take you to a PDF document that's readable and markable. Once the voter has completed marking their ballot, they will then print it off at their home printer, or they will have to send the document on to go to Staples, or your library, if it's open, may be able to accommodate you. Again, we understand this is not a fully accessible system, and we are trying to litigate that issue moving forward. But this is what we have for June. So you will then take your ballot, your printed ballot from your printer. You will fold it up and you will put it in your oath envelope. And then you will sign this oath envelope anywhere on the envelope. Then you will put it in to your USPS envelope, and you will get it out in the mail. If you have physical disabilities, you might need assistance. If you are blind, you also might need assistance. If you live alone, you don't have a printer. These are all hurdles that people will have to, may face in this election. So that is how the system works for June. I hope it looks a lot different for November. Do you want to go to the next slide, Robin? All right, so again, this is the process for the June election. If you are helping somebody, or if you yourself need help with this process for June, please, you can contact Disability Rights New York. The phone number is there. You can email Helen or myself. We can try our best to help you remotely. We can get in on a call. Our office uses WebEx, not the most accessible platform, but if that's what if you have your own platform, we will do whatever we need to do to make sure you all are supported in your efforts to make sure that these votes are getting out the door, or they're received. So.
Very nice, Christy. Thank you very much. That was very informative. We're open for questions now. Please go to the bottom of your screen and you'll see a Q&A button, and click on that and type in your questions, and we'll be able to see them here and read them to our panelists and get you some great answers. Christy, in the meantime, are there any sanctions that are possibly pending against any county boards of elections because of their dragging the feet on this, on an accessible absentee ballot? And I know, having worked the polls for many, many years, that we see this every election time. People coming in wanting a provisional ballot, they have an absentee ballot, they don't know what to do with it. What can we use to prod the counties to get moving on this? And does it take a court order from a Supreme Court justice?
Well, I think what you're raising something that is really outside of the scope of the litigation. This litigation is really, it is hyper-focused on accessible absentee ballots, but for somebody who, let's do a hypothetical here, which hopefully does not actually happen, but I imagine it will. Somebody requested an accessible absentee ballot. They did not receive it. Maybe it sat in the county's inbox. Maybe the county received it. They didn't process it to a vendor soon enough. Yeah, these are problems that hopefully nobody faces, but my guess is voters will face these problems. If that happens, a voter can always go and vote in person if they have not already submitted their absentee ballot. So certainly, if you are going to do this, I would, if you need to vote in person because, for example, you haven't received your accessible absentee ballot by election day, I would call the Board of Elections as early as you can, even the day before or the day of, and explain that you never received your accessible absentee ballot. And the way Governor Cuomo issued an order that said boards of elections have to make the county boards of elections have to have a ballot marking device in their office so that they can be available for people with disabilities who want to vote by absentee ballot. So what a voter could do is they could go to their county board of elections office where, in theory, they have all of the information about who received what type of ballot. You could go and you could get the ballot and vote in person at the Board of Elections office. And that is really that is pursuant to the executive order. That's not pursuant to the way our election laws are written, where we have early voting and where we have election day voting. So it is a bit complicated, but certainly your best bet is just to go straight to the source, go to the county Board of Elections office.
Good. Christy, we have a question from Ian out in the field, and his question is this: can you help with any questions about voting in elections, or is it just for handicap disability issues?
Well, we are, Disability Rights New York is, we have to have, in order to assist individuals or advocates and provide technical assistance, the issue has to be somewhat related to disability. So the answer to your question, I think, is yeah, there has to be some disability component to the issue in order for us to get involved.
And we have a note from Jessica De La Rosa. Hello, Christina. I want to thank you for all that you have done so far to get the Board of Elections to even provide an accessible PDF. However, it didn't address the issues of individuals not having the ability to print it at home. And given the state and New York City is in that moment, many individuals don't even have libraries as an option to print their ballots. Also, there is the issue of the oath envelope that needs to be folded up and your ballot to be put in. Not everyone is going to be able to do that independently or at all. I know given the short time frame, this is what we could get, but there is more that needs to be done for the November primary. Could you just elaborate or perhaps address Jessica's points there, which are well made?
Right. I mean, Jessica stated it absolutely perfectly. Yeah, those problems still exist. That is our mantra for this case. Like, we're not giving up until this issue is tried, or we get a fully accessible, we get the Board of Elections to agree to institute a fully accessible voting system. We're entering the second phase of the litigation. You know, I would say the day after the elections is when the Board of Elections is going to be able to wrap their head around this case again. We're giving them some leeway. Hopefully they'll come to the table, but there's an inherent issue that we're going to have to overcome with the online submission, given the climate of security and internet security. And we're going to address that, and we're going to attack it as best we can. It's a defense. It's a strong defense. It will be a strong defense. We don't know what their defense actually looks like, but that's the logical route that they're going to take.
Right.
The federal government is, you know, there's information out there that conflicts with what people with disabilities need and what they're entitled to under the law. So we're going to be navigating this area. We're basically going to be paving the way for this conversation, and it may end. You know, we don't know how it will end. Basically,
Okay.
We will put all the effort that we can into this litigation because it is incredibly important for the reasons that Jessica laid out. Like the individuals who we are helping, you know, I had roundtables where we just, and countless conversations with people who are blind, who don't have a printer for obvious reasons.
Yes.
They don't use what is produced from a printer. It's not accessible to them. So to think, why is it logical for a person who is blind, who wouldn't otherwise need a printer, go out and spend $100 on a printer to use to print out one piece of paper? That's absurd. When there are other solutions out there that do afford a voter private and independent vote. So these are the questions that we're going to tackle in the second phase of the litigation.
Very good.
Please continue to share your stories with DRNY and you know, the advocates that are working on this lawsuit.
Christy, another question. We have two more from Phil in the field. I've received some complaints that the new iPad style registration book in-person voting polls gives people with dexterity disabilities problems. This new iPad style registration book. Please talk about that for a moment. Right.
Yes. So the issue with your signature is a really important important topic, and I think that in this COVID voting world, it's even more important because now you are requiring people to sign on a device that is used by all the voters, presumably.
Mhm.
I actually haven't addressed this issue in any formal way. I have heard that it exists, that there are problems with the way these iPads collect the signature data in a way that it doesn't necessarily match what's on file. Certain polling locations are stricter than others. Certain poll workers are more rigid than others in how they can identify a matching signature.
Yeah.
If you are concerned about it, I recommend speaking with the Board of Elections and addressing this before you get to your polling location, because if you have a signature on file that will not look the same using an iPad, that can mean that that a poll worker may require that you complete a provisional ballot and not the standard ballot to be counted there at the polling location. So unfortunately, it's a responsibility that the voter needs to take on and not rely on the competency of the Board of Elections and poll workers at, when you're there at the voting location.
Very good. A question from Megan. Are you looking for feedback on how the whole absentee voting process goes? The PDF ballot Albany sent had problems, and I expect some voters may not be able to use it. Even if we still have this model for November, I would hope there would be more uniformity in terms of the vendors used to ensure these forms are truly accessible.
So Megan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you're talking about the absentee voter, the accessible absentee ballot request form. Yes, you are absolutely right. When the litigation team briefly reviewed and processed it through for accessibility through the experts, it was in sort of a standard controlled environment. It appeared to be accessible. It was not accessible to all. It was in no way a universal design. The Board of Elections pulled that together within a few hours. And the Board of Elections does not have every tool at their disposal. In fact, I don't even think that request form, I think that was made in-house. So it wasn't, but I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was made by in-house people at the Board of Elections office. If this process exists in the same way for the November election because we haven't come to a full resolution in the lawsuit, or if this is the resolution that we come to because that's what the judge believes is appropriate and equal for the November election, then we are certainly going to look at that, make sure that it is more universally accessible request form. We don't know yet. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Megan has an aside here. She says, no, they sent the ballot and it is very difficult to navigate, had issues.
Oh, the ballot itself. Yeah. Okay.
So.
Interesting. Okay. Go ahead, Helen.
I don't know if this is the exact issue that Megan had, but one thing with the ballot, actually, never mind. I'm thinking about the application in terms of the PDF and having it saved on the desktop and it can't be opened in a web browser.
I think Megan's talking about the PDF ballot itself that Albany
sent. Yeah, no, that was my fault. I apologize.
Yeah. Okay, great. So Megan, wow, you already got your ballot. That is, that's great to hear. It's not great to hear that that it's not accessible. or it is problematic, or it's not as accessible as it should be from a reasonableness standpoint. I certainly, if you report these problems, so whoever, whoever voters who receive these absentee ballots, these accessible electronically delivered absentee ballots, please report back your experience. User feedback is going to be incredibly useful to continue our case in court. There is a, and actually, Helen, can you pull it up? The National Federation for the Blind, they are, the New York chapter is a party to this lawsuit. They have created a survey that we will be pushing out, and that's how we will be collecting data. So, so this NFB survey will be shared with the litigation team. Helen, I'm sorry, you're right, you don't have it. When I finish, I will, oh, actually, Helen, can you ask Amanda? She has it. So the NFB has a survey, and we will push that survey out, and we will get you the link now. DRNY will push it on a social media page. We encourage every organization to push it out on their social media page, because this is how we are going to get the most widespread feedback across the state on how the absentee ballot program that was put in, that was cobbled together for June, how it played out. That's how we're going to change and better our solutions moving forward. So just like the information that we were given in our roundtables in April that led to this litigation, the feedback that we are going to be getting in the surveys, as well as we will likely hold roundtables shortly after the election to get feedback. This information is crucial in order to get a robust conversation going for this lawsuit.
And Derek brings this whole issue right home. He says, in your opinion, Christy, what would be the ideal system for accessible voting, accessible absentee voting in November? The ideal system.
Yeah, I mean, for our plaintiffs, which is who we're working for, this is not a class action lawsuit that we filed, but the idea is that it will reach the people and change the system from a statewide, from a statewide level, so everybody will get the benefit of it. But for our plaintiffs, the ideal system will entail an online delivery program. Ballot. So the online delivered ballot, email delivered ballot, basically what's in place for June, except more universal design and better, a bit more accessible ballot itself, because we're getting feedback that it's not accessible. And then we would have an online submission as well. So we would eliminate the voter's responsibility to print a paper ballot, put it in an envelope, and send it off. That second step would be done in an accessible way. Now, what we know of that exists is there are online voter submission tools. I know that security is the primary concern for those. However, what we are going to challenge the state is to make the system accessible, as well as meet the security standards that are required for our fundamental right to vote, so that it's not, so that it is a secure and safe solution, accessible solution. We are not advocating for widespread online submission in our voting program. That is not what we're litigating in this lawsuit. We are strictly working for our plaintiffs who need the online submission option. And that's what they want, so that they can vote privately and independently. And we understand that this may, this solution is it's what meets the needs of our plaintiffs. It may not meet the ideals or the needs of other people.
Right, right. Any other questions from the field?
Oh, just so you all know, Helen just put in that survey. So it's a very, very simple site. It's NFBNY.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I just, nfbny.org/voter-survey.
Good. Other questions from the field?
Mm-hmm.
It's an ambitious project. We wish you all the best of luck, obviously, and we will stay tuned on this. I want to thank everybody for attending today. Robin, are there any housekeeping issues we need to bring up before I close?
No, just a reminder that you can access the poster and the handout from today's session at ilny.us/GOTV. And thank you again to Christy and Helen for being with us today.
Yes. And also we appreciate that all of you do in our communities across New York State, day after day and year after year. And as Robin mentioned, we've uploaded some items for you to use to the chat box, a handout that she mentioned for starting your own Get Out the Vote campaign, the PDF poster, which we talked about earlier in the program. And also the PDF poster will be professionally printed and mailed to you shortly. So look for that in the mail. And as a reminder, please complete the evaluation form that will be emailed to you. And we value your input and encourage your ideas for future programs. Now, here's a note. Please mark your calendar to join us next month. That will be in July for part 2 in this 3-part series. And the part 2 program is Rev Up, Making the Disability Vote Count. And that program will be Wednesday, July 15th from 1 to 3 p.m. I will be there as your host, and we will have also joining us Carrie Gray, the Senior Director of Stakeholder Engagement and Strategic Communication for the American Association of People with Disabilities. Now, looking way ahead into August will be part 3, the final section of this workshop, and that will be called Get Out the Vote. The time is now. Mark your calendars for Wednesday, August 19th from 1 to 3 p.m. And we will be there with Andy Lee of the League of Women's Voters of Albany County and New York State Assemblyman Angelo Santa Barbara, and a roundtable of independent living leaders from around the state. And I guarantee you that will be a lively discussion. Thank you again for being with us today. Until next time, be safe and be well. Take care.
Thank you all again.